Hey everyone, it's Jim
And Charles.
from Valves and More, an online vintage tube store. And today in Tube Lab number 252, we're going to do a follow-up on last week's 6SN7 critical listening. So we'll go over the results and we'll talk a little bit about what it means.
And it was actually pretty surprising, but we'll get into that in a bit.
Yeah, before we get into today's episode, we should update our U.S. customers on the tariff situation. On August 29th, 2025, a 35% tariff came into effect on all non-CUSMA goods imported into the USA. CUSMA is just the current free trade agreement that's in place. Since last week, we've learned that the final tariff owing is determined when the parcel clears U.S. customs. How does that work in the store? Well,
we are still shipping again to U.S. customers, but there are some things that you need to keep in mind whenever you're shopping. So if you have a vacuum tube or a kit in our Mellotone amp store that's made in Canada or the U.S., it should be either fully or partially exempt from the tariff. But unfortunately, the reality seems to be that nothing is getting through without at least a 4% tariff being applied.
Right. So at checkout, you will be charged the maximum full tariff rate of 35%. That's a preliminary charge, and that means that there won't be any extra charge later on. And when your parcel clears customs, we'll get a final invoice from our broker, and then we'll be able to review that invoice, and should you be owed a refund, we'll promptly send it back to your original payment method. Note, this does not affect anyone other than customers shipping to a U.S. address. And we've got one more announcement. I don't think we've ever had two announcements, so let's get that over with so we can get to the fun. After more than 5 years and 250 episodes of Tube Lab, we're going to try a different schedule. From now on, Tube Lab will alternate weeks with our other channel, Mellotone Amps. Tube Lab will continue to focus on all things related to vacuum tubes. In particular, we try hard to get the fundamentals correct with good, clear explanations of everything we talk about. Now, not everyone's going to always agree with everything that we say, but and that's fine, and it's normal. And occasionally we end up sparring in the comment section with someone. There's no reason to get upset, though, if we disagree with what you're saying, and we won't get upset if we disagree with what you're saying. The main thing is just to keep the discourse on a nice, friendly level, and to support your argument with facts. Now, so on the alternating weeks, we'll do a Mellotone Amps video, which will focus more on the equipment side of things, in particular the kit amp business, of course, and what we're up to. But we'll also range wide and far. Right now we've got what hopefully will be a really great R2R reference stack coming in, so we'll probably be talking about that at some point. Now, the reason for the change is the fact that our kit business has just grown so much over the last couple of years that we need to devote more time to producing content for those interested in gear. Now, if you're interested in improving your system and are on a tight budget, and who isn't, the MTA channel may be exactly what you need. I'll put a link below the video in case you haven't subscribed yet. Okay, how about we get back to our regularly scheduled program? Okay, so these are the 3 tubes that Charles did recordings for, and that you did some critical listening on last week. And before we get to that, caution everyone, electronics and tube amplifiers can have very high voltages present, which can be lethal. Exercise extreme caution when working around them. Always consult a professional technician when in doubt. The results of last week's critical listening session are as follows. Number 1, Now, this is not number one in the rankings.
This is the first recording.
The first recording. We actually were getting a little messed up ourselves, so let's use good terminology.
Mm-hmm.
So the first tube up in the critical listening sessions was the Sylvania. Well, it's the early Sylvania 6SN7. Let me see if I can get the label up. It's a Jan tube, so it's a mil-spec tube, WGT. So this is a back-to-back straight plate with a single support post.
Roughly equivalent to an early GTA back-to-back, but a military spec version.
Up next was one of the last Sylvania 6SN7 GTBs ever made. This is the Coinbase. And this is actually branded RCA, but they're all of these were all made by Sylvania. In fact, in the last days of the second tube era. So starting about the mid-1970s, going up to the last years when basically all the plants, except for a few, closed. So between 1980 and 1982, a lot of manufacturers were scrambling because they still had orders for tubes and their lines were shut down. In fact, their factories may well have been already shuttered.
So you see way more rebranding going on, and a giant like RCA that at one point had factories all over the place were rebranding tubes made by Sylvania.
Yeah, and all of a sudden in the late 70s and early 80s, you'll start to see tubes made in Italy and Mexico, all of a sudden showing up with brands as though they were made, in fact, in the U.S. or in Europe. So
and then they started buying from the Soviet Union.
Yeah, things got really crazy in the last days.
So that was the second recording, and the last one over here is...
The third was the Sylvania 6SN7 GTA angled plate. So this is the second generation angled plate. It was made in the later 1950s, and it's probably the most common and highest production volume GTA that Sylvania made. So there were a lot of these around, but that's now 70 years ago. So the supply of these is becoming very, very thin. And even though I wouldn't call it endangered, it's getting very close. And interesting enough, these Coinbases, because they were made only in the last few years of the second tube era, there really weren't that many of them made, and we don't see them very often.
It's almost like they switched the lines over to the Coinbases maybe in the last year or so and pumped a number of them out, and that was it.
Yep.
Okay, so down to the results. Really,
Okay.
really interesting.
Okay, so nobody, and I mean nobody except for me, liked the WGTs. And that was surprising. So we don't have any comments. One of the things I like about this tube, and particularly this early GTA version with the back-to-back plates, and the mil-spec version, which has the support rod. The regular consumer version didn't have the support rod, not normally, anyways. It wasn't commonly done that way. Is that it's sort of the best of the balance I find between warmth, so second harmonic distortion, and resolution. But that's just me. Okay, let's get on to what people said about the Coinbase. In fact, the Coinbase had slightly more likes than the GTA.
And it comes out on top of the three.
So one commentator said great lower mids, more holographic presentation. When somebody says holographic, they're referring to essentially the sound stage as it presents. So that's going to be not only the stereo image, so what's in the left and right side of the stage, but the depth and the height of the presentation as well. So just imagine it as sort of a 3D positioning of the instruments and the sound that you're hearing, including the vocals. In fact, most importantly, the vocals. A simple example of that is the positioning of the drums. In early jazz recordings, it tended to be either hard left or hard right, because that's just the way they mic'd it, and that's the way they mixed it, and that's the way they mastered it. And they did that for decades. And then in the early days, well, I shouldn't say the early days, in the 1970s, rock and roll was getting into its heyday, and a lot of recording technology was keeping up with the rockers, and in particular bands like Pink Floyd, and before them the Beatles, because they were doing a lot of innovation in the studio. They were demanding a lot from their engineers, from their studios, from their equipment, and we were hearing some really innovative presentations of how good the sound could become. And of course, Dark Side of the Moon was the album, I think, that really broke this wide open. Before that, Sgt. Pepper's really took it a big leap forward, but Dark Side of the Moon just blew our minds. I can actually still remember the day that my friend and I boarded the bus and headed to the deep downtown and got to Sam the Record Man. They ran a flyer every week, and they had a sale every week. And they always had a few featured high-volume records that they would, stock by the case lot. And we were our mission that day was to each get ourselves a copy of Dark Side, and we were not disappointed. And believe it or not, we paid $5.99. But that was money to us back then. So we each bought one record each. In fact, I rarely recall ever having bought more than one. In fact, it was a big decision if we were going to buy a double album, because it was twice the money. Anyways, I digress. Okay, so what did people say about the GTA? I should call this the much-loved GTA, because there are countless reports all over the internet about how great this tube sounds. And for years and years, we've specialized in this tube. And we basically have said, if you want the best of the modern types, so not a GT, which is much lowered spec, but a GTA or a GTB, you like a warm, rich mid-range, and you want good detail, this is the target. So we had... someone said, hands down, number 3. Another said, all 3 are very similar, but number 3 had something extra in the mids. And another said, too much. Gooey. And one of the comments said, number 2 and 3, but I would need to try them in my system. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So what is gooey? Well, the gooey is when the harmonic presentation just is too much. And I would agree that
people will call it muddy, murky, soft sounding, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, except you couldn't call the sonic presentation of the GTA muddy.
No.
Which is one of its superpowers, is that it gives you a nice warm mid-range, and it still gives you excellent detail. And the reason why that's a superpower is because as the second harmonic distortion comes up, the detail goes down. So the Sylvania engineers really knew what they were doing. They were trying to find a good balance between a great sounding tube and a very accurate tube. And there's all of the Sylvania 6SN7s and 6SL7s follow that balance to a more or less degree.
With it tending to go more warm as you get older and more detailed as you get later.
So it was clearly something that they were actually designing for. And I like to call that the Sylvania house sound. Now, this test was a bit tricky because every Sylvania 6SN7 GT, WGT, GTA, and GTB will at least sound good.
We haven't heard a bad one yet.
If not very good. And even though all of the generations sound similar, they do have their unique differences, as we just found out. For example, the first generation and much lower spec GTs, also known as bad boys, we don't have one up here. In fact, we just sold a pair to a gentleman. It's a tube we've specialized since the very beginning of the store, and I think it got number 1 on the...
on our tube numbers. That tells you how old it is.
Yeah. So now...
so they have a refined level of bass resolution to them, the earlier ones, the GTs.
That no other tube comes close to. And I mean no other tube, not a Sylvania, not a G, not a Mullard. It's just phenomenal. And the next generation GTs, A's, all have this really warm, rich mid-range and excellent detail, as we just talked about. And it's just a great, balanced tube. The biggest difference, in my opinion, is in the second harmonic distortion, which really fills in the mids and brings music to life. But too much of a good thing can become a negative, as we just talked about. And I think that leads us to a brief summary in that for everybody who cares about their music, works on the sonics of their system, rolls in tubes, spends time critically listening, even making notes using one of our listening sheets or making up their own. What is heaven for someone may be kryptonite for someone else. It's got a little bit too much warmth in the mids. I'm not really too keen on it.
Yeah, if your system's already very warm, then it might end up sounding gooey, as somebody said.
Or you're coming over from a completely solid state system. So everything is solid state. The music source is digital. You're streaming it. Sure, it's very high resolution, but there's no warmth in that system from beginning to end. And then all of a sudden you get into tubes, you have a tube system, maybe you start playing vinyl, you get seriously into vinyl. It's a rabbit hole, folks. It's a lot easier for me because when I grew up, we had 2 choices. Well, we had 3, actually. We could listen to the radio, and a lot of us did. FM radio was just starting to come into its own. So that was huge in my life. And we could listen to records, or we could go to reel tape. Those were the options. Or we could go to a live show. And tape was incredibly expensive. It's still incredibly expensive. So records, that was how we listened to music, and the radio. And every once in a while, we'd spring the big bucks and go to a live show. So... yeah. So if you've come over to a vinyl system from solid state, that might be way too much. You might really prefer
a cleaner tube with less second harmonic distortion added into it. So a later one like the GTB might have been perfect for you.
Yeah. So I think having an open mind and trying various tubes. I mean, we often will get notes from customers around the world, which is one of my favorite things to do first thing in the morning, is to answer the overnight emails. And I love making recommendations. Sometimes I can't provide a recommendation, but usually we can. And it's really good to get just a very short, brief summary of the sort of music you like, a basic rundown of the kind of system you're running currently. Often I'll get notes saying, I'm building a system, and I'm just starting to get into real hi-fi. What would be a good sort of, affordable 6S-N7, for example? Mm-hmm. In which case, that's an easy answer. We almost always will tell people, go with the Photon, our number 222. In fact, we'll bring one out in a minute when we do show and tell, and talk a little bit about why you really don't have to spend a fortune to get great sound. But to get to that next level, it starts to cost money, unfortunately, because a lot of the best sounding tubes are getting really rare.
Yeah, and very expensive and difficult to find, testing good, and noise free.
Okay, well, let's clear the decks and see what came in, Charles. Okay, what have you got to show off, Charles?
All right. Well, we've got some of your favorite GTA angle plates, as decided by, I'd say, roughly 50% of the voters on the last video. Although I think the GTB did slightly beat it out. A lot of people really did like these guys. And we have a couple of what are technically new old stock pairs, but they're testing a little bit lower. So we bumped them down to the used category. And we have 2 pairs of them. So these are going to be some fantastic tubes for some people out there, and we're going to keep trying to get more, of course.
Yeah, and among the 6SN7 GTAs, the Sylvanias, this is the highest demand tube that we sell. The earlier angled plate, straight plate version, made in the early 1950s, from about 50 to 55. Is now almost extinct. I would say it's at least endangered. So they're getting really hard to find. But the angle plates were a little more common, a lot more than were made. So we're still seeing some of them trickle in. But if you're on a budget...
And what we do have more of, we have way more than just 2 pairs of these guys. The Photons are an amazing option. I think we've called them the budget bad boys or the poor man bad boys before. They have that same style of construction where we have a big foil getter on the bottom. You can see the flashing for it right here. And they have those back-to-back straight T-plates. Although they use a gray coating, a gray cathode coating, instead of the black one that the Sylvanias used on them. They have a very similar sound. Being an early tube, they have a lot of second harmonics to them, and still a good mix of detail. They're just excellent sounding, and they test very, very well.
Which is always a good indication of a quality manufactured tube. We rarely have to throw out. Now, when we get a big mixed lot with some used ones, because a lot of these were used for military applications, we have a lot higher failure rate, of course, because who knows, how many fields the tube went bouncing over under combat conditions.
And it's the same for any used tube, really. Who knows what its life has been if it was pulled from a piece of equipment and has been bouncing around in cardboard boxes for a while. But whenever we get these new old stock and in match set cases, which is pretty rare these days, but we do occasionally get some, they test wonderfully.
And the best thing about the Photons is that they're reasonably affordable. So yeah, and in audio you don't always have to try to stretch a tight budget to A++ or 110%. In fact, I just made that decision recently when I spent a lot of money on what will hopefully be our reference R to R DAC, and I didn't. I probably could have afforded to spend a bit more, but I thought I'm happy with 90%. If 90%, if $2,000 gets me 90%. And $5,000 gets me 95%, and $10,000 gets me 100%. I'm fine with going for 9 out of 10. I'm fine with that. I'm more comfortable with keeping a few spare bucks under the mattress.
Especially if you're budgeting for your system here, that extra amount, even though it might improve something like a tube just a little bit to go from this one up to something like a new old stock bad boy. Is that money better spent somewhere else in your system? Like on a new amplifier, better speakers, a new set of headphones, something like that.
Or taking someone you really love out for a nice meal. So, which is...
There are other things in life than audio.
Yeah. Did you really say that?
I did.
Okay, now we've got a good and bad news story, and then we'll be done for the day.
Well, actually, I was going to cut there, but let's just clear the deck and bring them in here. So last week, I think it was last week, we showed off some wonderful looking RCA 6AS7 tubes. These are dual power triodes. We use them in our OTL amplifier. A lot of OTL amps use them.
And we were just listening to them in the first kit build, and they sound amazing. They really sound very good. And a lot of early types of any tube tend to sound really good. That's pretty normal. But how did they test, Charles?
Well, on the actual tester, they weren't that bad. They were a little loose, which, can vary depending on what manufacturer you're getting them from. But for noise, well, first of all, it almost deafened me in one ear, one of the tubes. Very loud pop on startup, so that was not good. That one was rejected right away. Another one, low noise on the right channel. Another one after that, a weird buzzing bee noise on one channel.
Which I don't think we've ever heard.
And I think we had one that was badly microphonic. And this just unfortunately happens. We love vintage tubes, and for the most part, vintage tubes perform and were built to an excellent level of standard that surpasses a lot of modern production stuff.
Yeah.
But occasionally, the old ones, they just weren't built that well.
Yeah, or, we get a problem lot. So it was a fairly big investment for a very small return. So we ended up, out of a fairly big lot, we ended up with...
one matched pair.
One matched pair.
That has been thoroughly cleared. Don't worry.
Yeah, Charles's ears can attest to that. So they're in the store if somebody's interested in trying them out. And we've got lots of singles, of course, and there's actually quite a few OTL amps that will take singles, and of course we'll clear them. I mean, if there's going to be a problem, our OTL headphone amp will find it, because the level of resolution of that kit is unbelievable. And if there was a mouse that farted in the corner of a studio, there's a good chance you'll actually hear it on the recording, and that the OTL amp will pick it up for you. Certainly on a really good set of headphones. So, yeah. So anyways, so sometimes things don't go so well. But at the end of the day, we ended up with a pair of really great sounding tubes. We just had to buy a whole bunch to get there. Anyways, if you stay to the very end, here's some discount codes to help you out and to help to reduce the tariff pain. There's actually a code that I'm going to give you that's really quite easy to figure out. It's Cheers50. That gives you $50 off of $500 in purchases. And there's still a hidden code after that that's a big step up. So you have to buy a lot of stuff, and then you get a lot of money. Anyways, we can reach almost everybody around the world with $20 flat rate shipping. And if yours is $150 or more after the discount, the shipping's on us, folks. This is Jim.
And Charles.
Signing off. Cheers, everyone. Oh, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.